Fantastic gentlemen here. Okay. Hey, we're live. This is SDV. We are having a fantastic session. My name is David Mantica. I'm the marketing director here at SDV, and we have such a phenomenal topic to get into. First, I want to introduce the gurus. So first off, we have our Executive Vice President of Contracts, Mr. Mark Blevins. Mark, it's great to have you.
Hey, thank you, Dave. Thank you very much for that kind introduction.
Oh, you know, wait till you hear all the stuff that Mark knows. It's absolutely amazing. Then I'm gonna introduce you to John Toussaint. John is our Regional Director of Sales for the medical side of the business. Hey, John.
Hey, Dave.
Great having you too.
Pleasure to be here.
You've been around the block in this world related to SDB. You know the world. So this is talking about federal procurement challenges. And we're going to have a couple other sessions going on. So we call this one part one. And this part one is about dealing with small business, the declining small business presence in the federal procurement world. So I'm going to pass it over to John. John's going to start the questioning with Mr. Blevins. Gentlemen, have a great conversation.
Thank you, Dave.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, Mark. So as Dave alluded to, right? So I understand that there is a declining number of small businesses within federal procurement. Can you help to shed some light on this and help me to understand its impact?
Yeah, thanks, John. The numbers are staggering. In the last 15 years, federal procurement officials have watched the numbers drop by more than 50%. In other words, 15 years ago, there were north of 121,000 contractors participating in the federal marketplace. Fast forward to now, it is barely 61,000. And even more staggering is the fact that during the same time period, the number of small businesses in this country has grown significantly. So as the numbers go up for the entire marketplace in this country, the numbers have went way down for those participating in the federal procurement process.
Wow, that's a huge drop-off, Mark. Let me ask you this, but is this good for the government and the taxpayer?
I would suggest that it is not good. And the reason why is that the government has embraced a policy to have the maximum amount of competition possible. In 1984, they enacted a statute called CICA, C-I-C-A, stands for the Competition and Contracting Act, in which the federal government said competition is the foundational bedrock going forward when the government solicits to buy supply items and services and construction, which includes A&E. So in 84, approximately 40 years ago, the federal government said, we want to have the maximum amount of competition in the federal procurement process. However, and this may seem contradictory, in the last 15 years, we saw half of the competitors in the federal marketplace leave. So to give you an example, sort of like, I don't know if you're a football fan.
I am.
But, okay, well, think about the NFL. There's 32 teams, I believe, currently in the NFL. How would you like to see half of them just removed so that now, instead of 32 teams vying to make its way into the Super Bowl, there's only 16?
Well, it depends, Mark. I'm a Dolphins fan, so if they remove the New England Patriots and some other teams, I'd probably be okay with that. But it changes things significantly.
It does. And to answer your question, I cannot imagine that federal procurement officials would be able to say with a straight face that having less competition, meaning less competitors, is somehow a good thing.
I have a question for you. So you know, we're a small business. I imagine there's lots of small businesses out there, right?
Yep.
Despite the declining numbers here, how does a solicitation become a small business solicitation?
Well, I mean, one thing I didn't want to mention, but I'm going to point it out now, and it's going to tie in later, I believe, to some other follow-up questions, is that the overall dollars going to this decimated pool of small businesses is up a lot. In other words, the federal government has not slowed down its spending by any stretch of the imagination. The problem is those dollars are going to a smaller pool of contractors. Now, how does a contractor actually start competing, I believe is your question. And it's pretty simple. They look at a solicitation. The government will post a solicitation most likely on sam.gov, which is a federal website, stands for Systems for Award Management.gov. Years ago, the procurement process had a whole bunch of different websites. The federal government finally consolidated everything into one website. There's other platforms. You could be on GSA eBuy. There's some private market places. For example, you could go on FedBid. But basically, we're going to talk about sam.gov. The government will post a solicitation on sam.gov. Most of the procurements out there, especially with a small business, are going to be for the procurement of either a commercial supply item or a commercial service, or construction, which includes A&E. And most likely, since we're talking about commercial procurement, it's going to be captured on an SF 1449. That is the form used almost always when it comes to a solicitation.
So when these forms are posted, I guess, on sam.gov, as far as the solicitation, are they already earmarked for small businesses?
They should be. I mean, when you look at an SF 1449, it's normally a two-page form, and is followed by what's characterized as continuation pages, which is normally a Word document that spells out, what the government's trying to buy. It lists all the solicitation provisions and all the contract clauses. But on the actual form itself, what would-be government contractor should do is look at box number 10. And when you look at box number 10, the contracting officer is required to make public to the selling community a number of determinations that he or she made. For example, is that procurement set aside for a small business? And if it is, the contractor officer has further discretion in saying whether or not it will be set aside for different socioeconomic categories. For in other words, it could be set aside to a woman-owned small business, a veteran-owned small business, a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. We're in 8A. They also have to identify the NACE code. The NACE code is a 6-digit number which represents a certain industry. And there's approximately somewhere north of 1,100 NACE codes. And the NACE code determination is supposed to align with the principal purpose of a procurement. And for every NACE code, there is a size standard. In other words, the Small Business Administration has determined that based upon your NACE code, you either cannot earn a certain number of dollars or have a certain greater number of employees to be characterized as a small business. So there's a lot packed in that one little box. That one little box is crucial. And keep in mind, even though it looks like just a couple check marks in a box, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of regulations, numerous policies, umpteen different board and court decisions regarding all those determinations and decisions, which the small business contractor needs to somehow intuitively understand when trying to compete for that award.
Gotcha. So earlier we talked about the fact that the number of small businesses participating in this marketplace seems to be declining. Based on what you just said, as far as solicitations very likely being posted for small businesses, does it increase the odds that a small business will get a contract award from the government?
Well, it should, but it really doesn't. Because keep in mind, the government has objectives when it comes to dollars set aside for small businesses. And I believe in fiscal year 23, the SBA and all the different agencies gave themselves an A+, so to speak, when it came to their report card. I believe the number was in the ballpark of 28%, 27% of federal procurement dollars awarded to small businesses. But again, I'm going to go back to my introductory comments. Those dollars went to half the number of competitors. So I can't imagine that really is an accurate report card. I mean, we can say, yes, the number of dollars awarded are way up 10% in the last year. However, again, those dollars are awarded to half the number of competitors. And also keep in mind, going back to FDR and the mid to late 30s, the federal government has completely embraced a policy that procurements should be set aside for small businesses. As a matter of fact, if you have right now, I believe the threshold is $250,000 or less. those awards are supposed to be exclusively reserved for small businesses. And if it's over $250,000, then the government's supposed to conduct what's called the rule of two. And that is, they are supposed to look at the entire federal marketplace, meaning that 61,000 plus contractors, to see whether or not there's at least two small businesses that can provide those goods or services and provide them at a fair and reasonable price. And I would suggest to you in the audience, it's probably a very difficult task to have a procurement in which you cannot locate two small businesses that can do the work and do it at a fair and reasonable price. However, I invite the audience to take a leisurely stroll through sam.gov and look at all the current solicitations, and a lot of them do not have a small business set aside or a socioeconomic set aside.
Let me ask you another question, Mark, right? So if, aside from that, right, from your comments earlier, it sounds like the deck is essentially stacked in the favor of small businesses.
It is. It is, and that's the counterintuitive thing here. The deck is really stacked in the favor of small businesses, but we are witnessing, as we speak, the mass exodus of small businesses from the federal procurement process.
So why are they dropping out at such a alarming rate?
Well, I mean, a lot of people give you a lot of different reasons, and I would suggest that all those reasons are probably valid to some extent. But I would say the biggest the three biggest hurdles are: one, the absolute complexity of just trying to understand the federal procurement process and all the different rules, all the different regulations, all the different policies. Number two is you need to have a pretty big treasure chest to get involved in this process. This is a very expensive process to get involved, because keep in mind, when the government posts a solicitation out on sam.gov, for example, you only got 30 days or less to respond to it. You're going to have to most likely fill out some forms. You're going to have to fill out a pricing schedule. You're going to have to put together what they call volumes and follow a bunch of very complicated, sometimes contradictory instructions, and you have to submit it on time. And all this takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money. And the third thing is something that I dealt with in my years as a contracting officer and when I was a contract specialist, is that somehow in this process, someone came up with this notion that everyone has their own interpretation of the rules. And I would readily admit there are some rules that are open to to some measure of nuance or some level of interpretation. However, a vast majority of these rules are clear cut when you read them. But you're going to see a lot of uncertainty injected into this process when you have all these different contracting officers for all these different federal agencies coming out with their interpretation on what the rules say. And you may have a small business reading the rules saying, well, hey, I'm reading it in the plain language, and that says the exact opposite. So, yeah.
Mark, that sounds highly complex, right? And such a high barrier of entry, right? And just judging on the amount of small businesses that are declining to participate in this space, it seems to be that there's so much risk as well, right? I mean, what do people do? What should they do? You're the expert.
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert, but there is a lot of risk, because if you're investing your company's time, your company's money, and you're trying to compete and you don't win, then you're not going to somehow be able to recoup those dollars. And at some point you will run out of time, you will run out of money, or you'll just run out of patience and decide this ball game's not for you. Now, a solution to this is to partner or somehow pair yourself together with a company such as SDV, which knows the nuances of federal procurement, because we are a company predominantly with veterans in our workforce, and we're here to help veterans. So we're veterans here to help veterans. I mean, that is one solution because, again, as I mentioned, you only have so much time and you only have so many resources. So either you immerse yourself in the federal procurement process to try to understand it, and then you try to go it alone, or you partner with someone who has been doing this for quite some time and has been exceptionally successful.
And you know, it's interesting, Mark, because you know, this conversation sort of kind of doesn't make sense for us to talk about this, right? We're a small business. We do a significant amount of business with the federal government each and every year. This topic essentially opens us up for competition, but obviously we're veterans looking to support our fellow vets. How would you recommend folks reach out and get in contact with us?
Well, we have a website, and I would agree with you. It does sound counterintuitive, but you know, competition is a good thing, and SDV embraces competition. We embrace the notion of helping other small businesses, and we embrace the notion that, hey, we are all federal taxpayers, and if there's more businesses and competition is enhanced, then it helps everybody. And even though you may say, yes, you know, does SDV embrace the notion of possibly having a competitor? I would say the answer is yes, because it makes SDV a better company.
Very good. Mark, I think, you know, it's a riveting topic because I mean, I've lived and breathed this for like the past, I don't know, 16, 17 years.
But isn't it, John, really wild as I was sitting there listening, the counterintuitive nature of this? First off, ton of money, less people. Yep. And so that risk factor is just gigantic from what Mark is talking about, right? The amount of knowledge you need to even do it. So, you know, Mark, from your perspective as it relates to SDV, how have we been able to figure it out? What are some things that we're doing that we can also share with other businesses to help them?
Sure. Well, I wanted to touch upon another point. Because the number of competitors in the federal marketplace has been decimated, and it has, there is room for new competitors. So in other words, we can't say, well, the marketplace is saturated. As a matter of fact, there's lots of room right now for new competitors. And to go to your question, Dave, we've been doing this a while. I mean, if you take a look on FPDS, you'll see that SDV has been awarded lots of contracts. So experience is the best teacher. We know the intricacies of the federal procurement process.
And we can share that with others. The key here is, one, you know, of course, we embrace that competition. We want more competition. And we believe the government and the taxpayers deserve that, for sure.
Absolutely.
Number two is certainly there's room for support for education and support. So SDV is here to support businesses as they try to figure out this acquisition process. And three, you know, if a veteran is looking and thinking about opening up a small business, I mean, we're here to help and discuss and talk to them about that as well. You know, Mark, in closing, you know, do you see this changing? Do you see the complexities of the procurement process changing? Do you see the almost totally, there's no rules, right? It's all interpretation. Do you see that changing?
No, as a matter of fact, I would say going back decades, it was always a very, very persuasive theme that we're going to make things simpler. We're going to get rid of complexity. We're taking down barriers. We're going to do all these things to promote small business participation in the federal marketplace. And I can tell you, every year it's gotten more and more complicated, more and more convoluted, and the numbers are proving that. The numbers are going down. They're not going up. So that part is, I don't see any real changes in that. And I can tell you, when you, even here at SDV, when I, look at solicitations and you start to, toss out questions to the different contracting officers, you'll realize this whole notion that everything is somehow subject to interpretation, and, the contracting officer has made his or her determinations. You realize it does not appear things are going to be changing anytime soon. At least that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's an expert opinion for sure. as we start working on closing out, John, based on all the stuff you heard, any thoughts? You've been selling in this marketplace for quite some time. You know the challenges of both those that are trying to buy specifically medical equipment, those clinical professionals who are trying to acquire it, and the challenges they feel. Do you have any additional thoughts based on that experience?
To be quite honest, barring the taking a stab at the learning curve, if you will, right, which is quite the tall climb. My highest recommendation would be just get together with a subject matter expert, whether it be with SDV or whatever company, and partner with somebody who totally understands the space to either help you to enter the marketplace or help you to advance your footprint within the marketplace. That'd be my recommendation.
Yeah, you got a lot. And then, Mark, any final thoughts from you before we close this out?
Yeah, I would say don't get frustrated. And, the federal marketplace can be a very lucrative marketplace. There's lots of companies who are making a good profit, and they are serving a public need. They are providing a good, if you will, to our taxpayers, because they are meeting, they are satisfying those goods and services that the federal government is looking to buy.
And innovative services too. I mean, that's the thing that gets me is that, without small businesses, as you said, are the ones that create jobs, right? Small businesses are the ones that really drive the economy. Large companies' net job gain is usually zero.
It is.
Go ahead.
Correct. Because when you think about how the SBA classifies a small business in the general marketplace, it's 500 or less employees. In the federal system, it's either going to be characterized as the number of employees, and again, it depends on the NACE code, or the revenue, the yearly revenue. And now there's very complicated formulas, but it's just, for simplicity's sake, it averages out whatever you average out in 3 years. And for example, if you have a NACE code that has a $25 million threshold, then that, hey, your annual cap is around $25 million in revenue. But then again, for example, if the government picks a supply NACE code that has 750 employees as the maximum number of employees you could have, your company may have revenues in the billions. So again, it's just these very weird nuances that play into, do I qualify as a small business? And keep in mind, you self-certify as a self-business when you do your SAM.gov registration, because that is the first step. You have to be registered in SAM.gov to compete for a federal contract.
It's so amazing. And, from I see of us at SDV, it's the innovation that we can bring to the table and some of the innovative vendors that we can offer to the clinicians and the designers that, that's where it comes from. That's where the innovation happens, man. It's just, it's so crazy to hear this story. Well, I wanted to thank you both. This was a highly insightful conversation with a lot of detail. First and foremost, you'll see us continue doing this. We're going to be tapping into Mark and John's expertise in a lot of different topics. And we appreciate you listening.
Yep,
thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, John.
My pleasure.
Thank you all, and happy Veterans Day. And for those of us who may be Marines, I understand November 10th is the Marine Corps' 249th anniversary. Yeah. So happy Marines, happy Veterans Day.
Semper Fi.